Hello. Welcome back. We have another article from Robert Whiting's Japan. This one he published last week, and he addresses a relatively current story and pairs it with something that happened a few decades back. The title is Alkonis Case Brought Back Memories of the Infamous Girard Incident, and it was published January 28th of this year on Robert Whiting's Japan Substack. That's robertwhiting.substack.com. Robert's still in California. He'll be back sometime this week to Tokyo. So we have this from California. Navy Lieutenant Ridge Alkonis was a weapons officer stationed on the USS Benofold at Yokosuka Naval Base in Japan in 2021. In May of that year, he took his wife and 3 children on a scenic drive to iconic Mount Fuji. On the way back down, he blacked out and drifted into a restaurant parking lot where he crashed into several cars and pedestrians, causing the death of 2 Japanese people, an 85-year-old woman and her 54-year-old son-in-law, who had been enjoying a birthday celebration. Alkonis paid a solatium of 160 million yen to the survivors of the deceased and expressed his remorse, claiming that mountain sickness caused him to pass out. Nevertheless, a Japanese court found Alkonis guilty of negligent driving the following year, determining that he had simply fallen asleep and that acute mountain sickness cannot occur at the altitude of 1,000 feet above sea level, which is where the accident happened. The panel of 3 judges sentenced him to 3 years in prison in September 2022, a decision Alkonis declined to appeal. The U.S. Navy conducted its own investigation and came to the conclusion that Ridge had indeed fallen asleep. However, the case strained bilateral ties between Japan and the United States. Thanks to the efforts of Alkonis' combative wife, 20 United States senators sent a letter to Japan's Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, expressing their concern over the ruling by the Japanese court. 30 members of Congress followed suit, charging that Alkonis had been denied due process. Utah Senator Mike Lee, like Alkonis, a member of the LDS Church, was especially vociferous in his criticisms of the way Japan had handled the case, claiming Alkonis had been targeted because he was a foreigner and that he was a victim of Japan's one-sided justice system, in which prosecutors win over 98% of all their cases. In February 2023, Lee issued an ultimatum threatening to cut off U.S. military aid to Japan if Alkonis was not released within 24 hours. When Alkonis did not automatically appear at the prison gates with his release papers in hand as demanded, Senator Mike Lee took to the floor of the U.S. Senate and questioned the 1960 Status of Forces Agreement, or SOFA, between the U.S. and Japan. SOFA, which allows the Japanese government to prosecute members of the American military for illegal acts committed in Japan when not on duty. This prompted an official complaint from the Foreign Ministry of Japan. In December 2023, Alkonis was transferred to a federal prison in Los Angeles under the Convention on the Transfer of Sentenced Persons after a personal appeal by the White House, prompted by lobbying efforts on the part of Mrs. Alkonis. Shortly thereafter, the United States Parole Commission released the lieutenant before Alkonis had even served less than half his sentence. Photos of him in his car with his family appearing in the press, along with accounts of him welcome back home as a hero, offended many back in Japan. As did a statement from Senator Mike Lee demanding an official apology from Japan for putting the poor man in prison in the first place. The entire affair recalled the so-called Girard Incident of January 30th, 1957, when a bored U.S. Army soldier named William S. Girard, guarding a military base firing range during a lunch break, shot an empty grenade cartridge at Naka Sakai, a Japanese housewife who was collecting spent shell casings. It was the 19-year-old Girard's idea of a practical joke, but one which had unintended consequences, as the missive struck and severed the poor woman's spine, causing instant death. The Girard killing sparked a firestorm of outrage from the Japanese public and led to a huge dispute between Japan and the United States Army over jurisdiction, one which went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Army maintained that Girard had committed his act while on active duty, and therefore, under the new post-war U.S.-Japan Mutual Security Treaty, signed September 8th, 1951, Girard should be tried in an American military court. The Japanese government, however, argued that Girard had committed his evil deed during lunch hour, and that firing a weapon during that time was not at all part of his official duties. Therefore, jurisdiction belonged to Japan. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, fearing the effect on U.S.-Japan relations if Japanese public sentiment was ignored, gave in to demands that Girard be tried in a court in Japan. Girard appealed this decision, and the case ultimately went all the way to the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., which declined to get involved. Protests back home erupted. Girard's supporters back in his hometown of Ottawa in Illinois launched a petition calling on the U.S. government to reconsider. The veterans of foreign wars claimed Girard had been, quote, sold down the river, and a U.S. senator from Ohio, John Bricker, publicly condemned the decision, calling it a sacrifice of an American soldier to appease public opinion in Japan. Ottawa's eccentric mayor, a man named Paul Egan, leapt into the fray by publicly lambasting the U.S. government and sending a cable to Emperor Hirohito, of all people, protesting Girard's forthcoming trial. His cable read as follows, quote, "Because our State Department has sold us down the river, I wonder if you would act to encourage better feelings between the people of our two countries by releasing Private Girard from Japanese custody." When Hirohito replied obliquely through an aide that he, quote, could not possibly intervene in the matter because of the Japanese Constitution, sounding much like a Supreme Court judge himself, the combative Mayor Egan announced that he would fly to Tokyo and, quote, raise a little hell over the matter. The Japanese public was spared this particular slice of Americana when, at the last minute, the mayor was forced to cancel in order to answer a local court summons. Assault and battery charges had been filed against him for punching one of his own aldermen. Girard was found guilty in his subsequent trial, with the judge saying that he could not understand Girard's action or his conflicting explanations of them. However, he ruled that since he could find no evidence of deliberate murder, he handed Girard a 3-year suspended sentence. Girard was demoted to private and shipped back to the States, but not before he married a local bar girl and took her back home with him. Both she and Girard were inundated with hate mail from Japanese. U.S. President Eisenhower was deeply disappointed by the turn of events and the intense anti-U.S. base reaction from the Japanese people, marked as it was by increasingly intense protests for their removal. As a result, he cut American garrison forces in Japan by nearly half the total number of American soldiers stationed there. American soldiers who were there defending the Japanese archipelago were deeply upset by the animosity the local media and the public in general were displaying towards them. Quote, "If this is the army," said Girard's platoon leader, "then I don't want any part of it. I quit." familiar sentiments would be expressed quite often over the next 80 years, as history would indeed repeat itself from time to time, replete with bizarre, one-sided, and anti-foreign declarations on both sides. There was one underlying constant through it all. The Japanese government had the power anytime it wanted to abrogate the Mutual Security Treaty, as did the United States government, but the powers that have never seriously considered that option. And for all the fire and rain, public support of U.S. bases in Japan has always been in the majority. The end. Now, there's a footnote, and there's a link. I'll put it down in the description. It's an article from the LDS Daily, which is something like "Help Bring Ridge Home" from the Latter-day Saints Daily. And also, there's another footnote which indicates the U.S. government, in the case of Private Girard, paid a total of $1,748.32 to Sakai's husband and his 6 children. And finally, there's an in-depth description of this Girard incident, which will appear in Robert Whiting's forthcoming book this year in April from Tuttle. It's called Gamblers, Fraudsters, Dreamers, and Spies. I hope you like this. If you do, please like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have any requests from Robert Whiting's Japan, please let me know. If it's possible, as soon as it's possible, I'll ask him permission if we can read some excerpts from his new book. Again, it's called Gamblers, Fraudsters, Dreamers, and Spies. And that's all for now. Have a good day.